What's up everybody, Landon with LMR.com. Today we're going to be installing the Pro-M EFI management system into our little 1988 coupe. For those of you that haven't seen the first part of the Pro-M EFI system install, be sure and check that out so you can learn a little bit more about the system and how you go about removing your factory harness. Now in this video, we're going to be providing a general understanding on how you install one of these systems into your Fox Mustang. Because this car is a 1988 model, a few minor steps will differ for the other year ranges. As far as engine specifications go, we are fairly uncertain as to what is actually inside or whether it's bored and stroked. So as far as we know, it's a standard issue, run-of-the-mill 302. This car does have a low-P idle, so a camshaft has obviously been installed at some point in the car's life. A 5-liter Explorer upper and lower intake feeds air into the GT40 heads, which then exit into an unknown pair of shorty headers and a high-flow mid-pipe. So with all the ins and outs covered on this particular car, let's go ahead and start the install. Position the harness within the engine bay. Pass both the ECU connections through the firewall. Pass the OBD2 connection through the firewall, and then feed the main harness through. Position each accessory wire into the firewall and push them through. Lastly, pass all of the relays and fuses through the firewall. When doing this, periodically check underneath the dash and make sure none of the wires are in a bind. Because our car will not currently be utilizing meth injection or nitrous, we ran the purple and tan accessory wires back through the firewall as well. Tape them along the main harness, and then take this time to remove any items attached to the firewall. This will allow additional clearance to route the main harness. Now install the provided grommet into the firewall opening. Locate the factory holes that once housed harness clips. Mark each hole as well as the harness. Position a harness clip onto the convoluted tubing and then secure it with electrical tape or specific harness tape. Do this for any clips that you want to use. Feed the low oil level sensor connection down the firewall. The open map sensor connection will be for boosted applications. Remove the indication tape from the harness indicating passenger and driver. Route the passenger side of the harness down the fuel rail. Plug in each fuel injector connection. Plug in the coolant temperature sensor. Our car doesn't have the charcoal canister setup, so the electrical connection will remain unplugged. Use a harness clip and secure the harness to the opening in the heater tube. Moving to the driver's side, plug in each fuel injector connection. Plug in the IAT connection, water temperature sender, TFI module, and the oil pressure connection. At this time, you can wrap the map sensor connection in a plastic bag and secure it out of the way if it's unused. Reconnect the wiper motor connections. Plug in the 2 harness connections in the driver's side corner. Ensure that you connect them to the correct color. Reinstall the vacuum tree. At this time, you can reconnect your brake booster vacuum line. Moving to the driver's side inner fender area. Install the red wire on the main harness to the power lug on the starter solenoid. Reinstall and retighten the retaining nut. Plug in the coil connection and then tuck the wire out of the way. Plug in the AC compressor electrical connection. Remove the factory dedicated PCM ground wire from the negative battery cable. Then loosen and remove the retaining bolt from the inner fender. Now you can completely remove the factory PCM ground from the car. Connect the new ground wire to the negative battery cable. Since this wire is alongside the negative cable, use some tape to secure it out of the way. Reconnect the plug wire back onto the coil. Moving underneath the car, plug in the low oil level sensor connection and ensure that this wire is positioned away from any exhaust components. Install the provided O2 sensors. Route and secure the O2 wires out of the way. Because of the long connections, we secured ours to the transmission. Mark each end of one of the provided O2 sensor connections with an L and the other with an R. Mark each end of the O2 sensor extension wires with an L and an R. Depending on how you want to route your O2 sensor wired into the car, the next few steps are going to be optional. We chose to make an incision into the driver's side bulkhead grommet. The small ends of the wires were taped to a long 1/4 inch extension. We then fed the extension through the incision in the grommet. Once the wires were through the grommet, we removed the tape and the extension. Feed the extensions down the back of the engine over the top of the bell housing. Plug in each extension into the O2 sensors. We utilize an 8L clamp to properly secure the O2 sensor connections to the back of the intake manifold. The remaining slack was pulled inside of the car and positioned and zip tied out of the way. Moving back over to the passenger side, the purple and tan wires were secured and properly taped. The ends of each loose accessory wire was protected with heat shrink tubing. They were then placed in a plastic bag for added protection. Per Pro-M's recommendation, we chose to mount our ECU underneath the driver's side seat. When doing this, be sure you check for clearance of the seat track and spring mechanism. Ensure that you also work around the support plate if your car has subframe connectors. Once marked, drill 4 applicable size holes for the hardware of your choosing. We selected M10 machine bolts, nylock nuts, and an assortment of spacers to secure the ECU to the floor pan. Once it is mounted, double check clearance. If everything checks out okay, take the seat back out and plug in each connection. Each connection is specific, so you don't have to worry about plugging them into the wrong socket. Move the seat all the way back to ensure the main harness is not in a bind. Once this is checked, properly secure the main harness to the floor. Plug in the provided O2 harness and then use some convoluted tubing to wrap the harness. Feed this harness underneath the dash and towards the driver's side or wherever you are going to mount your air-fuel ratio gauge. Once that's done, go ahead and move back to the driver's side. We chose a single pillar pod to mount our air-fuel ratio gauge. All of the wires were then brought up from behind the dash with a flexible piece of hose. The passenger side O2 sensor extension was plugged into the correct connection on the digital controller. The driver's side O2 sensor extension was plugged into the correct connection on the air-fuel ratio gauge. Use the provided link cable and plug it into the cable labeled out on the digital controller. Plug the other end of the link cable into the in connection on the air-fuel ratio gauge. At this time, you can connect the provided computer link cable to the out port on the air-fuel ratio gauge. Now it's time to wire the gauge and controller to the O2 wiring coming from the Pro-M harness. Hold all of the loose wires together and determine where you want to splice them. Starting with the red power wires, cut and strip each wire to whatever length you need them. Twist the red wires from the controller and main harness together. Slide a piece of heat shrink over these 2 wires. Then wrap those 2 with the red wire from the gauge. Solder the connections. Slide the heat shrink into place and then apply heat to shrink the tubing. Splice the white wire on the gauge to ground if you do not want to use the auto dim feature. Reference the instructions for the air-fuel ratio gauge to properly wire the auto dim feature. Cut and strip the wires. Twist the black wire and white wire on the gauge together. Twist the black ground wires from the main harness and controller together. Slide a piece of heat shrink over 2 of the wires. Wrap the wires together and then solder. Slide the heat shrink into place and then heat to seal. Cut and strip the purple wire on the main O2 harness and the yellow wire on the gauge. The purple wire indicates the driver's side. Slide on a piece of heat shrink and then wrap the wires together. Solder the wires. Slide the heat shrink into place, and then apply heat to seal. Cut and strip the yellow wire on the main O2 harness and the yellow wire on the controller. The yellow wire indicates the passenger side. Twist the wires together, and then solder the wires. Position the heat shrink into place, and apply heat to seal. Snip the unused brown wire on the controller to length. Slide a piece of heat shrink over the end, and apply heat to seal. All of the wiring is now sorted for the gauge and controller. After the wiring was complete, we then mounted the gauge into place. Be sure to zip tie and properly secure all of the wires and digital controller. Now, if your car doesn't have a check engine light, use the provided wiring and light from Pro-M. Find an area that you like within the car to mount the light. We chose the area near the panel dim switch. The cluster surround was removed and the appropriate sized hole was drilled. Feed the check engine light wire through the hole. Fully seat the check engine light. Wrap the exposed wires in convoluted tubing. Feed it behind the dash and towards the passenger side kick panel. Zip tie the wiring out of the way. Remove the fuse from the holder. Insert the fuse tap into the holder in the correct orientation, and then reinstall the fuse. Remove the insert from the Pro-M connection. Insert the short wire from the fuse holder with the female end into this connection. Reinstall the insert. This wire will be connected with the gray wire with yellow tracer on the factory connector. According to Pro-M, there should not be a tan wire present in 1987 and 1988 cars. Not sure why our 1988 did, but like all things Fox body, who really knows? We depin the factory tan wire by removing the insert, followed by the wire. The wire with the male terminal on the Pro-M check engine light was inserted into the same pin location. To lock it into place, the insert was reinstalled. Now you connect these two connections together. Remove the towels covering the runners. Make sure the PCV grommet is in the lower intake manifold. Ensure that the plenum gasket is centered. Position the upper manifold into place. Reconnect the fuel pressure and PCV vacuum lines. Apply anti-seize to all of the retaining bolts. Place them in their respective location. Tighten them by hand and then torque each bolt starting in the center and working out to 18 to 22 pound-feet. Reinstall and retighten the two bolts, securing the throttle cable bracket to the throttle body. Reclip the throttle cable back onto the ball stud. Finish connecting all the electrical connections associated with your application. Connect the source on the vacuum tree to the intake manifold. Reinstall the breather tube. Organize the mass airflow sensor wire and utilize harness clips to retain it to the fender. If you are not using electric fans, protect the harness and tuck it out of the way. Reinstall your air intake assembly. For our particular application, we decided to install an Anderson power pipe. At this time, use the provided felt square and wrap all of the wires located at the passenger side kick panel. Reconnect your negative battery cable. Be sure and give everything a good, solid once-over. Alright guys, wrapping everything up here, the installation of the Pro-M harness is pretty straightforward if you've dealt with electrical harnesses and other high-end components. If this is something you are considering installing into your own car and you aren't completely comfortable installing it yourself, please reach out to a trustworthy local performance shop so that they can get this system installed for you. Now, this was a general understanding on how to install the basics for the Pro-M EFI management system. Certain components can be mounted in place however you so choose. That is going to conclude part 2 of the series, and when we return for part 3, we'll start the car and make the small adjustments that are needed in the Pro-M EFI software. So until next time, guys, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Fox Mustang videos. Like this video, and of course, don't forget to turn on notifications. While you're at it, don't forget to check out our other videos and be sure and shop lmr.com for all things 1979 to present Mustang and SVT Lightning.